Hi everyone, this is Brian Hayes and welcome to episode 39 of the Music Mind podcast. Today my special guest is London-based session trumpet legend Johnny Thirkell. Johnny has played with the biggest names in the business. He's toured the world and recorded and performed, and he's led a happy life playing the trumpet. Please enjoy my conversation with the great Johnny Thirkell.
Ladies and gentlemen, on tour with us, the incomparable Mr. Johnny Thirkell.
Hi Johnny, and welcome to the Music Mind podcast. Fantastic to have you here today, all the way from London, as my special guest for episode 39.
Thank you, Brian. It's very kind of you to invite me. Very nice to be here. Looking forward to it.
Now, our audience have just seen and heard you take a really good solo live in Tokyo. I think it was in 1993 on a song called Tighten Up. Do you have any sort of recollections, any memories of that? I mean, it's over 30 years ago now.
Oh yes, I do. Yeah. Well, first of all, if I remember that clip, well, certainly I would have had hair in those days, right? Back in 1993.
We both did.
So yes, I know. I did spot we both go to the same barber.
That's right.
But no, I remember that. Actually, I remember that trip for a number of reasons. It was our first. Those are the Jamiroquai now, and I'm still involved on and off. Off at the moment, but I ever since that first album, I have been involved both in the studio and on the road with Jamiroquai, on and off. But that was nowadays, Jamiroquai is this huge machine, with Pantechnicon after Pantechnicon. Then it was that was our very first trip actually outside of the UK. So it was the first Japanese tour.
Okay.
I remember that trip because I was actually kidnapped by the Japanese mafia. Yeah, I hate it when that happens. Don't you?
It's a good story. Look, we'll get to that. I've got a copy of your Blown It book. I love it.
Good man.
And
thank you.
We'll talk a bit more about that later on. Yes, you've had some interesting little escapades there.
Yeah.
As far as it's a great trumpet solo. There's nothing quite like hitting a high note and sustaining it live to get the audience reaction, and you certainly did there. I guess I've got, from a Music Mind perspective, was that solo totally improvised, or in that pop setting, had you sort of rehearsed a solo and largely repeated that live?
No, totally improvised. I mean, to be honest, Brian, Jay, he's a sort of latter-day James Brown in some ways. Jay will just point at you in the middle of a tune. So actually, a lot of the time, there wouldn't even be a trumpet solo in that song. It might be in a different song. He likes to sort of direct things, keep everybody on their toes. So it's very possible the night before that we did that we would have done that tune without a trumpet solo. He'll just point at you and then off you go. But we played that tune a lot of times, so I knew the changes. There's nothing, it's hardly giant steps. You know what I mean?
It's great.
It's a pretty straightforward sequence.
Yeah,
No, it's a great.
Yeah.
Look, I think one of the interesting things, Brian, is I get a lot of, I was going to say young trumpet players actually, but I get trumpet players in their 40s now who is kind of a generation younger than me.
Yeah.
They often say to me, up until Jamiroquai, they hadn't really thought of the trumpet in that context. There's a lot of solos, a lot of trumpet solos in the first two albums, Emergency on Planet Earth and Return of the Space Cowboy, and on after that. And it was quite a new thing, I think, to feature the trumpet so heavily in what was kind of chart music. So it's pretty groundbreaking, and that nothing to do with me. This is all Jay's. This is kind of Jay's vision of what he, kind of audio vision, I guess, of what he wanted of how he wanted the band to sound. So there are a lot of trumpet solos in those days. Not so much now.
Yeah, and look, I think what I really liked about that track, the minute I heard it, is great sound on the horn. You're in a pop setting, but you've got a lovely, big, fat, wide open sound on the trumpet. Now, of course, in a lot of recording sessions, you've got no control over the sound they end up giving the trumpet. And I'm sure you must be frustrated over the years with, massive compression, and you end up sounding like a little ant. No matter how hard you've worked on your tone, you can end up. And the late great alto sax player David Sanborn said in an interview once he hated what they used to make him sound like. There's an album he did called, I just can't think of the name of it now, but it was Jazz Standards, where he had control over his sound. And you actually got to hear how big and fat and gorgeous David Sanborn's alto sax actually sounded,
Yeah, look, I think, Brian, you obviously know what you're talking about, because it has been throughout my career a bit of something of a bugbear. And I guess once you get to a certain stage in your career and you're feeling confident that it's not going to lose you the gig, then I've had countless, I wouldn't say arguments, but I've had to point out to countless sound engineers, I've spent years and years and years and hours and hours and hours trying to develop a big fat sound. I'm just not going to allow you to make it sound like a kazoo.
Good.
And I think by and large, well, it's either laziness, right? They can't be bothered they don't trust me. They don't. And I can see why they might think this way. Sometimes they don't trust the musician, his own sensibility to make sure that he's not going to peak too much and bust the meters. But often it's inexperience, I think. And Brian, I don't know how you feel now these days, but more and more I come up against sound engineers who've never really recorded a horn section before, and actually, thankfully, in most cases, they are they're happy to take any direction. I take my own microphone with me wherever I go, just in case they want to put something awful in front of me.
Yeah, put the snare drum microphone on your trumpet.
Exactly. Yeah.
Improvisation. Anyone can learn to read music. I mean, it's basic. In many ways, it's primary school mathematics. Anyone can be taught to learn to read music. But what's your take on improvisation? Is it really for the chosen few who've got that knack? Or can it also, in your opinion, be taught to almost anyone? Yeah,
it's an interesting question, Brian. And look, first of all, I would preface this by saying, I'm no Clifford Brown, right? I can play I'm playing solos in pop music, right? So I'm not putting myself forward some jazz giant. But I'm in the course of my day-to-day work, I'm required to improvise often. Often I'll record a track and then they will get me to just blow across the whole track, and they'll pull out snippets for you must have come across.
Yeah.
They'll pull out things for snippets. Now, one of the things I do these days, as I gently slide into, I'm getting a bit long in the tooth for touring, and that's something which, I'll do short tours, but when the long ones come up, I politely decline.
Yeah.
So I've started running residential music camps. I'm lucky enough to have a big old farmhouse in southern Spain, just outside of Granada. And one of the things, I do a horn camp with a very good friend of mine, a sax player called Snake Davis. So one of the things we teach there, of course, is improvisation. And I think, the really heavy duty proper improvisers, that's something they will spend hours and hours shedding on scales and this and that works here and this. Actually, for me, Brian, it's an oral thing. I teach a module there on oral training techniques. Okay, and I try and get people to start to recognize intervals, and to be able to pick out. Once you can pick out those intervals, I think then the nirvana, if you like, the end of that road is the ability to just play what you hear in your head. Okay. Now, I don't, I couldn't tell you often, if I do a little with Snake Davis, we do a thing called, rather creatively, the Snake Davis Trio.
Yes.
And we were up all night thinking of that one, Brian. So we play, it's kind of Jobim tunes. It's jazz, but not really, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
I didn't, I said to the students there, you could stop me at any point in any of those tunes, and I could not tell you what the chord is. I have no idea. Great. But I know what I hear in my head, and because I've trained myself. And some people will find this easier than others, right? Some people have a natural ear, but I think you can train people to learn and recognize intervals. And the more you do it, the faster you recognize them. And then it becomes automated. You then recognize, well, okay, that's a sixth. So I'm starting on a C, so I play an A. And for me, that I think is the way forward. Perhaps not for if you want to be Clifford Brown, but if you want to be able to play an acceptable solo, I think if you just learn the intervals and get them sort of inculcated, ingrained in your mind, your brain will your fingers just end up doing, you know what I mean? They end up just going to the right note. And that's how I feel. I think you can train anybody to improvise. I mean, I do, yeah. Some people will take longer than others, but I think it's possible, yeah.
Well, I totally agree with your approach. I've been playing music for 55 years on 1,000,001 instruments and teaching a lot of people in different settings. But I just have a statement, and I stick with it. If you can sing it, you can play it. The biggest problem I've got with people is, I say, well, what is it that you want to play? I can't hear anything, Brian. I'm thinking, well, where's this going to lead? This leads to the 1960s American university approach where they worked, hey, we can make a quid out of this. We can listen to Clifford Brown and analyse what Clifford did over those chord changes. But I'll guarantee you, I don't think Clifford was thinking about that B-7 flat 5 when he was playing.
Yeah. You know what, Brian? You and I are on exactly the same page there. That used to drive, I went to music college and they would make us dissect, they'd put a particular piece up and we would dissect it. And I never saw the point of that because, like you say, I don't believe that the great players, I think they just have this in their head and it just comes out.
You're quite a humble chap. I mean, it's hard to miss the fact that there's, 48 gold and platinum records behind you there. You've had an amazing career. I think it's 38 number one UK records you've played horn on. And more than a decade, you were on at least one album that was in the top 50 in the UK charts. I mean,
for 13 and a half years. Yeah, 13 and a half years.
Do you ever pinch yourself and think like, for the miner's son from northeast of nowhere to rattle off that stat? And I encourage people to go to your website. I mean, I started looking at the records you've played on, the people you've played with, and my eyes got sore after about the first 25, and the names are massive. But it's great that you've got them there, because you should be proud of that, really proud of it, particularly where you came from. And I want to go back to where you came from. But before that, I want to show our audience a little bit of an example of where you got to. We're going to look at just a short extract from a great song, Saturday Night's All Right for Fighting, Elton John, in his prime, and you happen to have a fairly decent little backing band there with you, Phil Collins on drums and Eric Clapton on guitar. You're at Wembley Arena and you're playing with a great horn section. Let's have a look at it first and we'll come back and just talk a little bit more about that. So, Johnny, the first thing I noticed in that, apart from great musicianship, the horn section magically turned up with white horns, sax, trombone and trumpet. It's hard to buy a white horn other than the plastic ones nowadays. What's the story behind that?
Well, it's showbiz, baby. So at the time, I worked a lot with the sax player on that clip was a guy called Gary Barnacle, and Gary and I worked together as the Phantom Horns for many, many years. And Gary had this great idea. He's a very creative guy. Wouldn't it be amazing if we had white instruments? And it does look phenomenal. Whenever there's a horn section thing, we did Level 42 together for about 10 years or something. And whenever there was a horn section thing, they would drop all of the lights, and then in front of our riser would be one of those, those purple ones that show all the dandruff when you're in a club, right?
Yeah.
Those, and they really pop out. It does look amazing, right?
Yeah.
So okay, I'll go with that. So Gary took his tenor along to Herbie Flowers, I think, or somebody like that, who had a company that would lacquer them, and he had it lacquered white and brought it back, and it looked amazing. But it cost him £650, 650 quid. I couldn't believe it.
And he stuck with it for life,
Well, look, like all sax players, Brian, they've all got a cupboard full of saxophones, right? But I thought, you know what, Brian? I only paid £120 for the trumpet. I bought it second hand. I paid it my whole career. It's still over there in the corner.
Yeah.
So I paid 120 quid for the trumpet. I'm not paying 650 to have it lacquered. No. So I went down to my local Halford's car showroom, and I bought two rattle cans, a couple of rattle cans of white spray. So mine is just it's Hillman Avenger White, my one.
And the valves, you didn't end up with sticky valves and sticky slides.
I was very careful. Yeah. I was very careful to block off the valves. Yeah, but the good thing was I could carry a little touch-up can around in my trumpet bag.
Fantastic, and as you said, it's showmanship, and I guess in that, Elton John, the ultimate showman, and his career's proved that it's paid off. I believe the horn you've been playing all your life is a Doc Severinsen Getson trumpet.
Yeah, it's a Doc. I thought, rather naively, if I buy a Doc Severinsen Getson, I'll sound like Doc Severinsen.
No, didn't. Must be the mouthpiece. Must have been the mouthpiece.
Yeah, I sound more like Doc Holliday.
Where did it all begin for you? I mean, you're sitting in a Hall of Fame little home studio there, but I believe it didn't start quite like that. Can you give us a bit of an idea of what was your first, recollection of being interested in music?
Well, actually, I was drawn not by music, but by laziness. Really, I think you're talking about how did I take up the trumpet? Is that the crux of the question? Yeah. That's right. I was about quite a late starter, Brian, about 14 or something, and I noticed every Thursday, in double maths at school, this kid, a couple of rows in front of me, would get up and just walk out, and nobody said anything to him. What? He just literally got up and walked out. No one said anything. So I collared this kid in the playground, and I said, his name was Kenny Brown. And I said, "Hey, Brownie, what's the deal with that then? How come you get to leave half an hour before the end of double maths?" And he said, "I'm in the school band, and we've got to go and set up for band practice at lunchtime." Right. Where do I sign?
That'll do me. That'll do.
Absolutely. I'm in. So it was that drew me to it. But Brian, they say that there's something in life. Everybody has something in life, right? It's a question of whether or not you find it.
Yeah.
And I have to be the luckiest guy in Christendom because I signed up for the band. They gave me a cornet, as well. It was a cornet in those days.
Yeah.
And I took this thing home, Brian, and it was like, honestly, it was like opening the Ark of the Covenant. It was just I just fell madly in love with this thing from the absolute beginning. And it was never, from then on, any idea of doing any schoolwork at all went out of the window. I used to come home from school and practice until tea time, and then practice a bit more until the neighbours knocked on the door. I just found the right thing. And of course, being from the Northeast, there's a tradition of brass bands up there. I grew up in a mining village. I was a coal miner when I left school. And every mining village had its own brass band. So like tons and tons of outlets. And I was just like right place, right time. I happened to find the right thing. And that insane good fortune has followed me throughout my entire life, Brian. I mean, it doesn't bear thinking about, really and truly.
So when you took that, I can understand the motive, because I was never a great lover of maths either, but it never happened. No one walked out in my era. But when you took that home and put it up to your face, are you saying that it just felt that you almost instinctively knew how to create a sound on that?
I mean, yes. I'm not so sure. I've never really thought about whether it was instinctive, but I was able to make a decent sound, and I was just. This thing was like a magic wand, And I still now to this day, Brian. I say to our students, we're magicians, right? We make things out of nothing, out of thin air. We make music. We make things that move people, that change, that create memories for life out of thin air. How amazing is that? And I got that sense as a 14-year-old boy holding this thing. And I absolutely took it. I mean, many years later, when I was a pro, I was doing an album with George Michael, the older album. And at a place called studio called Psalm West. It was Trevor Horn's studio. And in the band, my mum was down staying with me, and we were going to go look around London somewhere. And anyway, so my mum came with me. I thought you might be interested in what it's like in his studio. Anyway, we took a little break. I went down to the canteen and found my mother boring George Michael to death about how I'd learned how I could play God Save the Queen after about 20 minutes.
Oh, he would have enjoyed it,
Yeah, he was an absolute sweetheart. Yeah, the loveliest guy going. Yeah. But he was very patiently listening to my mother waffling on about.
You've got a great clip, a very short little clip I want to share with the audience here, and it's called "The Correct Way to Start Up a Trumpet."
See me. You've done your research.
I have done some work on now, this I love.
I'm rolling.
Are you rolling?
I'm rolling.
Right, he's rolling.
And then, of course, it turned out that I wanted to sing it.
So, Johnny, it's pretty clear to me that humour has been a big part of your life, and I can hear it in your playing. Is that fair to say that you've lived a pretty happy life and haven't taken it too seriously?
Well, look, at the risk of sounding a bit ethereal, when I left school, Brian, I was a coal miner. I went down, so everything after that is a bonus. Brian, I'm not the greatest trumpet player in the world. I'm not. I mean, the London is crawling with amazing trumpet players, but people want to work with people they want to work with, right? And I think, there's a school of thought that says good enough is good enough, right? Everything else is just headroom. And I know I wouldn't name names, but I know lots of musicians who are phenomenal, talented musicians, but they're just really hard work. They're hard to get along with. And I think, honestly, I genuinely think that what success I've had, such as it is largely because I'm quite a positive person, and I know I just get along with people. So long as you are good enough is good enough. And thereafter, it's about lots of other things. It's about taking care of business, right? It's about being reliable. It's about being on time. It's about being nice, about being fun to be with.
Couldn't agree more. I think that's a wonderful summary of how to be successful in life. And I love that quote. I think it was in your book. Good enough is good enough. One of the frustrating things I deal with a lot of beginners. There's, not necessarily children, but some adults. And they'll come in and they'll want to learn every possible scale in music. They'll have their metronome and, Brian, I can play a 3-octave chromatic scale in, and what have you. And I just say, Jimmy, what is it? What's your dream? What do you want to be able to do? I'd love to be able to play a soulful version of Amazing Grace. Should just play it. And this guy is practicing for Rafael Mendes's version of Flight of the Bumblebee. He's trying to make sure he can, maybe take it up an octave.
Yeah.
And I'm sort of saying, mate, have you ever stopped to think about aligning how you practice to your end goal? Because that good enough is good enough. I mean, geez, if you can play a major scale in 1 octave with a really great sound and some nice vibrato, have a crack at Amazing Grace. Have a go.
Brian, well, look, again, we are on absolutely the same page. I say to all of my students on our music camps, you can play as loud as you like, as fast as you like, as high as you like. If it doesn't sound nice, nobody wants to listen to it. I'd much rather. My favorite trumpet player in the whole world is Chet Baker, right? That's not a guy with chops. That's a guy who's got heart, right? Who shares the emotion with it. And I think, when we start, the first thing I ask students who come to us is, okay, what is the dream? Tell me what the dream is, right? No limits, nothing. What is the dream for you? And then you work backwards from that. I'm a big reader of Stoic philosophy, and Seneca once said, for the captain who knows not for which port he steers, no wind is favourable.
We can all make life so hard for ourselves and lead a frustrating life. And people often say to me, how do you play so many instruments so well? My thing is, I've never set out to be the best on any instrument I've ever played. My only dream is, can I get good enough to express myself with what I want to play? Not what page 335 of the Thurston clarinet method wants me to play. Can I play whatever it is? Lady, be good on the clarinet, and sound a little bit like Benny Goodman. Great, that'll do me. Thanks.
Yeah.
Now
that's what people want, right?
That's what people want. I heard something great the other day that our musical instruments are supposed to be our friends, not our enemies. And it sounds to me like your trumpet has actually been a friend to you across your life. Does it feel like that?
Yeah, Brian, it is still to this day my favorite thing to do in the whole world is play the trumpet. That's my best time. I love my wife dearly and my children, but I'm at my happiest when I am just in this room here playing the trumpet. I absolutely adore it, and the challenge never goes away. Right? It's a race without end. And I think so. Once you get that idea in your head, right, that there is no end point, then you just start to enjoy the journey, right? And I think that is the key to it. That's why I still enjoy playing, and I don't get frustrated. I just, something I say to my students is if there's something you can't play, or you keep on making a mistake, it's the universe telling you what you need to practice. That's right. I view mistakes as a positive thing, right? I'm being told, okay, you're struggling with that. Let's put a little bit of work in with that. Once you accept that, there is no end point, Only when they put me in a box, then you just enjoy the journey. Just make the most of it, right?
I want to play a track now, which was recorded only a couple of years ago with a UK band called Brother Strut. And I want our audience to see, they saw you when you were probably, I imagine, in your 30s, I suppose. Or in that
1993 would be what, 58, 60, 30, mid-30s, 35, yeah.
Here you are now in your 60s, sounding great, with a great band, playing some great trumpet. Let's have a look at this clip.
El Fuego.
Great.
The fire. El Fuego.
Okay, we don't hear much of that here in Australia. It's an unusual word. Okay, let's have a look and a listen to this clip, and then we'll talk more about it. So, Johnny, that's a beautiful trumpet there, unless you've got the spray paint out again. That's a sort of a black and gold tinged trumpet. What trumpet was that you used on that clip?
Yeah, that's not a showbiz trumpet. It's a trumpet called a da capo, and it is, the bell section is carbon fiber.
Ah, okay.
And I'll tell you the story very quickly. I was working in Los Angeles about 5 or 6 years ago, and it was when NAMM, the music show, was on.
Yep.
And I went along and I saw this thing, and because I have the attention span because I'm like a magpie, a nice shiny thing.
Yeah.
I was drawn to the stand there because they look amazing,
Yeah.
And the guy there, we all got a name badge. He quite clearly saw my name badge, did a bit of research. I mean, he pretended he knew exactly who I was, but I don't believe it for 1 second.
No.
I think he looked it up on the internet.
Yeah.
And then asked me if I would like to be an endorsee. And I explained to him, I've been playing the same trumpet, since 1978. It's too late to change now.
Yeah.
Anyway, but they kept on, and they asked me several times. Anyway, one day this trumpet turns up at my house.
Right.
So, and it is, Brian, it is actually a really lovely instrument. You wouldn't, I mean, it's bell section is glass, is the carbon fiber.
Yeah.
And it looks great. I used it in that video. I don't use it on a day-to-day basis. I use it actually for overdubbing. So how, like, if you're double tracking a trumpet, you would never, if assuming you can play in tune, you would never use the same instrument. You'd never double track on the same instrument or the same mouthpiece. You'd always change something to avoid that kind of phasing. If you get two guys. Yeah. So I use it as my double tracking trumpet.
Just before that track, we were talking about your charmed life with your friend, the Trumpet. But I've read in your book, and I encourage people to get a copy of that book. They can get it just from your website. And I'm in Australia, you're in London. It arrived within a week. It was fantastic. And it's a really honest, it's an honest look at life as a professional, largely a session musician, but there's a good look at the life of a touring musician in there. But in that book, you mentioned that you did have a physical issue. I don't know how late in life, but you suffered from a pretty bad dose of what they call Bell's palsy.
Bell's palsy.
Yeah, or I think focal dystonia is a fancy name nowadays. I don't know whether they're one and the same, but in essence, can you tell me a little bit about what exactly that condition is, how it crept up on you, and what you did about it?
Yeah, well, Bell's palsy, it's the trumpet player's nightmare. I think ask any trumpet player to tell you what Bell's palsy is, and they'll be able to tell you whether they've had any interface with it or not, because it's about the worst thing that can possibly happen to a trumpet player. What happens is it's a sort of virus, which is related, I think, to the chickenpox virus, as so many of these things are. There's a little nerve comes through a gap in your skull, down each side of your face, and somehow this nerve swells up. And because it's a tiny hole, it cuts off the blood supply, and all of the nerves die in one side of your face. Oh. So one side of your face just collapses like this. You have no muscular control over this. So, I woke up one morning and just, I go to the bathroom and have a wash, and I brush my teeth, and I'm trying to sluice the water around, and it's all kind of squirting out of one side of my mouth. And Brian, I knew instantaneously what it was. It's the horror of horrors. Instantly, I'd gone to the top of the queue for the auditions for Phantom of the Opera. My whole right-hand side of my face had collapsed down, right? And so, again, it sounds like a disaster, but fortunately, I knew exactly what it was. And fortunately, I rang the doctors and got a doctor who was sympathetic. Doctors must get this all the time. Oh, I've just read on the internet that, I've got... right, they must get that all of the time, right? Yeah. But I rang and I got to speak to a doctor, and I said, look, I'm a trumpet player and I've got Bell's palsy. I know I have because it's a trumpet player's nightmare. He said, come into the surgery right now. And so I went in there, and again, by good fortune, he'd done a little bit of research and worked out that the quicker you get on steroids, the quicker, sometimes you never ever fix it. Sometimes it never goes away.
Yeah.
But I was lucky to get, within an hour of spotting this, I was taking my first steroid tablet. And then, so I was on the course of tablets, and I spent the next 3 months with a pencil in my mouth, just trying to build those muscles back up. The pencil would sort of droop over to one side.
Yep.
And I would, driving the car, sitting in the bath, watching TV, just fighting to bring this pencil up straight in front. And I was very lucky. I was back sort of playing. It's there's the story in the book. The new Jamiroquai album was coming up, and I was desperate. I'd done all of them up to that point. I didn't want to, I didn't want to miss out on this one. So I got back to kind of playing within 3 months, and then within about 5 months, I was back to square, or I was back at sort of 90%, just through. I literally didn't spend 1 second of the day without a pencil in between my lips. Just
congratulations on that, and your friend and mine in inspiration, Doc Severinsen, in his mid-70s, had a similar event. He said I don't know whether he just woke up one day, but he also knew he had Bell's palsy. And I love Doc's philosophy like you. He said, geez, I've had a good run. He's about 75. And as you know, Doc played right up into his 90s. And he thought, look, this might be it, time to, he likes riding horse and that, time to put the trumpet. He said, but you know what? He said, before I do that, I'm going to see if I can practice my way out of this. So Doc, as you might be aware, was a fiendish mouthpiece buzzer. He'd be happily spent 2 hours a day just on the mouthpiece, and then 8 hours on the horn. That was his way of life. So he just doubled his mouthpiece practice. He said when it first happened, he couldn't even get a buzz out of it. But he just, instead of spending 2 hours a day, spent 4 hours a day buzzing his mouthpiece. And over a period of time, he could start to feel getting better. And like you, he made a full recovery and went on to play, some of those things he did in his 80s.
He's still playing incredibly now at 90, right? One of my inspirations, Doc Severinsen, the man who's been my idol all of my adult life is Jerry Hay, but Doc Severinsen comes in a close second.
Now, I want to go back to Alan Kaplan. Really, just an absolute gentleman's gentleman. I love talking to Alan. It's for anyone who's interested in the podcast, it's episode 16 of the Music Mind podcast. Well worth checking out. Now, one thing you share in common with Alan is he also spent a bit of time with the Buddy Rich Band. Initially, I think he was playing second trombone, but he eventually ended up playing lead trombone. And I want to play a clip first of all, because I'm sure you'll have some things to say about Buddy Rich. Alan did too. But let's have a look. You're in Prague in 1984. Now, at the time this was recorded, Buddy would have been 65 years old. And I imagine in 84, would you still be in your 20s then, or
No, 84. I was born in 1958, so it would have been 20. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah. So you're half of.
Yeah, that's what happens when you leave maths halfway through, Brian.
You can get a calculator nowadays, mate. Just carry a calculator around on your phone. So this is an intriguing thing that I want to talk about. The band leader is more than twice the age of just about everyone in the band, but in fairness, killing it on the drums. Let's have a look at the Buddy Rich Band live in 1984, and you take a wonderful jazz solo here on trumpet. So, Johnny, love him or hate him, I think it's hard to deny that Buddy Rich, I think, in fairness, took what you could do on a drum kit to a higher level than when he first sat behind it. Would you agree that? Let's park Buddy Rich the man and talk for a little bit about Buddy Rich the musician. What's your memory of that titan of the drums, and where you were standing in that clip? You're his closest. You'd be the first one to get a drumstick through your head if you missed a note. Tell us a bit about the experience of being in that band with the great Buddy Rich playing drums.
Yeah, look, it was terrifying. So immediately, and I'm sorry to sound a bit name droppy, Brian, but immediately prior to that, I'd been with Gil Evans' band.
Oh. And drop as many as you wished. at that.
There's a loud clang.
Clang. That's right. Gil Evans.
I'm sorry.
Wow.
I'm sorry. Yeah. Well, and like two more different people you couldn't possibly find. Gil was the most laid back, gentle guy, and Buddy was not the most laid back, gentle guy. And Buddy's band they were in London, in Europe on tour, and I think that the previous, so that was the jazz chair that I was on, the solo. You know, I don't know what it's like in Australia. In the UK, in a big band, you would pass all the parts around, right?
I think they do in Australia.
Yeah, but there in that Buddy's band, Tony Garuso played lead all night. I played the solos all night. You didn't. No. It just didn't happen. And so, anyway, he'd fallen out. There was some row. I think the previous guy had taken a drink on stage, or he'd taken a whiskey on stage, or something like that. Anyway, He got the sack. Yep. And on a night off, a couple of the guys, Tony Garuso, God rest his soul, who was the lead trumpet player there, and one of the other guys, Todd Schwartz, I think, they came in to see Gil's band, and I was chatting to them and got on well with them, and you know, we had a good night, and the next day, I got a call from Jay Craig, the baritone player, who was an English guy I'd known, an English guy who went over to Berkeley and ended up on Buddy's band.
Okay.
And he called me and said, "How do you fancy your spell in Buddy's band?" And I said, "Well, you know, I've still got 3 or 4 weeks left with Gil. But let me talk to him, because it's quite a thing. Right? I remember as a kid listening to the Buddy Rich band, and this was like something off of a different planet.
Yeah.
And Gil was like the sweetest guy in the world. He said, "Look, listen, man, you know, if it's a great opportunity, right? It's a great band. We'll miss you." But of course, he was sweet enough to pretend he would miss me. They just get another guy, and then that'd be
next.
Fine. You know?
That's right.
Yeah, exactly. Well, on Gil's band, the other two trumpet players are Guy Barker, who was this kind of UK jazz legend, and Lou Soloff. They were the other two trumpet players.
Wow.
So they're going to manage without me, I think, Brian.
I guess they would know, between the two of them, they would know a guy who knew a guy. Yeah.
Look, I think the dancing suffered a little bit, but but there you go. Anyway, so I get the call to go in Buddy's band, and this was like on a Monday morning, and I joined the band on Tuesday, and we got on the bus, no rehearsal. I had to do the gig. There was no rehearsal, nothing. We just got a sight read. I mean, in actual fact, that didn't really matter quite so much, Brian, because every night was different, right? Buddy would just call a tune, whatever tune he felt he wanted to do.
Yeah.
And then he would call a tune while he's playing the hi-hat intro, but I didn't know the number. So somebody would say, "Okay, it's like around 230 something." This paper going up like this, I'm trying to find, and I'm fighting my way through.
Goodness.
So it was pretty stressful in the beginning. I mean, it was pretty stressful all the way through, but in the beginning, right? Because one thing you don't want to do in Buddy's band is make a mistake. You do not want to do that.
Which is what Alan Kaplan. I said to Alan, "Did you guys after a while just sort of memorise your parts?" He said, "Brian, no one would risk memorising a chart in Buddy's band. You just don't do it."
No. No, you don't. You don't. Yeah, you learn that pretty quickly.
Yeah.
The one thing you can do, there are things you can do, the things you can't do. One of the things you can't do is make a mistake of any description. And look, what a phenomenal training, though, right? To be put under that pressure and to come out the other side, without a black eye, or it is.
And I think, in fairness, that era, the era that Buddy grew up in, you think of the other band leaders who had a reputation as hard taskmasters, Benny Goodman, Tommy Dawson. There was it was an era, I think, and I suppose if there's two ways of doing it, but I guess as a 65-year-old man trying to keep a herd of 20-year-old guys on track, I'm not trying to offend, him the way he might have treated people, but Alan Kaplan's memory was that he couldn't believe it. His first night, they're same as you. There's no rehearsal, Up pops a chart, and he's like, by that stage, he said, "I'm a good reader. I've been professionally reading," but he said the way Buddy played those drums, and you got to remember, Buddy never read a note of music. He said it was impossible to miss those accents, bap bap bap, because he said you'd be getting somehow or other. He'd be getting that to you. And he said it felt like the notes would just pop off the page in the right spot. That was his biggest memory of, I suppose his other memory was the energy of the man, and we see on that clip we've just seen, there's right at the end, he does a little drum solo there that, I'm not too sure anyone else in the world before or since could pull off. And he's just doing it like he's chewing a bit of chewing gum, Amazing stuff.
Yeah. It's kind of supernatural talent, really.
Yes.
And I think that sort of high bar drags everybody else up, right? You know what I mean?
I agree.
It's the reason those bands sound tight is because he's playing this tight, and he drags everybody by the scruff of the neck, kicking and screaming with him. One of the great things I learned there, and it's commonplace now, but then in 1984 I'd never seen this in the UK. So we do the first gig, and I think I'm hanging on by my fingertips, but I'm hanging on nonetheless.
Yeah.
And I would get the occasional nudge from Tony, the lead trumpet player, phenomenal player, and he'd give me a black look, and I couldn't work out what it was. And he'd do this several times, and then he would say, like in the after the first set, he said to me, "You've got to keep an eye. You've got to watch those offs. The offs are marked." And I had no idea. And then when I look at the part, there is, like, let's say there's a dotted minim, and it would say -2.5, right? And that means come off on the 2.5 beat. That's how Tony taught me that if you want to sound tight, coming off together is as important as coming on together. It's hitting the note together, coming off together. And I've never seen that before. And anything longer than a minim, there'd be a mark in pencil, -2 or -1 3/4 or something crazy like that,
Wow.
And that was it. That was a huge lesson for me. I'd never seen that before. It's pretty commonplace now, but we're 40 years later, right? But then I'd never seen that before, and it was quite a learning curve. Yeah.
Wow, great experience. Now, the trumpet for many people is an instrument that you have to have on your face every day if you're going to play it seriously. But you took a break from playing the trumpet, probably not intentionally, but in your book you talk about, I think it was for 8 years, you sort of went in a different direction. And this is a really important story, I think, to tell the public, that you started to realise that the tradesman trumpeter life is a hard road and only gets harder the older you get. So I guess in a nutshell, you started looking for passive income, if we wanted to use the modern day terminology. Can you tell our audience a little bit about this? Because here you are just slamming it out on the trumpet. What do? I'm a trumpet player. How often do you do it? Every day. I'm professional. But things change. Tell me a little bit about this. What sparked this little change? And for 8 years, apparently, the horn was
I've always been a thinking sort of a guy. And it occurred to me one day, remember this is back in the sort of 80s, late 80s, early 90s. And I thought, I couldn't do any more work if I tried. right? I'm working every day. In those days, there was tons of work, right? I'd be doing 2 sessions a day, 3 sessions a day sometimes. There was so much work around. It's not because I was particularly great. It was just tons of work.
Yeah.
And and I thought, I'm doing all this work. There's literally no more time in the day. I don't really go on holiday because you daren't, because somebody else will steal all of your work.
Yeah.
And I thought, and I'm still not rich. Do you know what I mean? I'm still right, and I can't keep this up because there's always some young guys coming up, and Brian, that's how it should be. I'm a big fan of that, right? I think the old guys are going to move over, right?
Totally
The new guys are coming through, and you either help them out, right, and usher them on their way, or they'll stamp on you, and
absolutely,
and they're going past anyway, so you may as well help them, right?
That's how the world works. Yeah.
That's exactly right. And so I started thinking about, okay, well, what are the things I can do to try and sort of ameliorate this problem? And I had a few friends who were in business, and I learned that you're never going to get rich if you have to be there, right? If you have to be there, there's not enough hours in the day. So we looked around. Me and a friend, we looked around for some passive income. And we started. It's a fairly convoluted story, which I shan't bore you with. It's all in the book, available on Amazon, folks.
Absolutely, yeah.
But we started a business where we own master rights. So we own 20,000 master rights. We started recording all kinds of stuff and licensing it for film use. Along came iTunes, and at one stage we had like 7,500 albums on iTunes.
Wow.
We built that business, and then after that I started a software company, and that's when the building the catalog company I was still playing during that period. And then I came up with an idea. Do you remember the old Jamie Aebersold records?
Absolutely.
Or My Music Minus
Music
One.
Minus
Yeah, right.
One. Yep.
Yeah, so around about 2007, the internet is just starting to catch on. And I thought, wouldn't it be great to have like a digital, like an online version of this?
Yeah.
And so we sold a business. My partner and I sold a business. He retired. I took the money. So this is 2006. He retired. I took the money and I set up a company, a software business. And very, very fortunate to take on a partner who was an ex-partner at Goldman Sachs. So we were able to raise some money, and it became quite grown up quite quickly, Brian. But it accidentally did quite well. And so, we had like 30 staff and an office in New York and all that sort of grown up stuff. Yeah. And you'll know yourself, right? If somebody's fixing a session, right, they want to make as few phone calls as possible. And the more you say, every time you say no, you slip down a notch on the list. And before you know it, they don't bother ringing you because they know you're going to say, well, yeah, that's right, exactly. And so it wasn't so much that I bowed out; I was bowed out. Yeah. For about 8 years until we sold that business. I know my wife said to me, "You can either get a job or a divorce. It's up to you. But I'm not having you hanging around the house all day."
Did you ever just quietly have a bit of a pap at home, or was it no, or the trumpet stayed in the case?
No, I didn't. I think I played a couple of times. I'm very good friends with Lisa Stansfield and her husband Ian, and I've played with them for many, many years. And a couple of times they convinced me to go out and do a couple of gigs with them. Okay, but it was deeply unsatisfying because my chops, I didn't play the way I wanted to play. Yes. So I did it a couple of times, and then that was probably maybe a year in or something like that. And then after that, I put it in the box and put it in the cupboard, and I didn't get it out until I was given a marital ultimatum.
Now, an interesting Australian twist on that. I'm sure you're aware of our great jazz trumpeter, James Morrison. You'd be aware of James.
Yeah, I mean,
he's special.
Yeah, on the basis that I haven't been living under a rock for the last 50 years. Yeah, no,
that's
phenomenal.
Exactly.
Well, you know what? And sorry to jump in there, but I cite him to any students that I have, I say, you mentioned earlier, it's interesting, we're coming in a circle here. I haven't got the sort of damaged,
No.
the kind of big lump and all that kind of stuff.
No,
And I think that's because of technique, good technique.
Yes.
I don't use any pressure. I play high, I play low. There's no pressure there.
Yeah.
And James Morrison is the poster child for that, right? The reason he can pick up a trombone and go like this and pick up a trumpet is because it's not, he doesn't have to screw it on, right?
Yeah,
it's just resting on the top there. And he, to me, has the best chops of anybody I've ever seen.
After 8 years, and your wife saying, get out of the house, do something. What was your comeback like? How long, what did you find was your challenge to come back to be able to play how you want to be able to play?
Look, it's an interesting point, actually, Brian, because actually my chops came back quite quickly. I would say within a month, my chops were fine. I mean, I was within a month, I would say I was probably at 80% of where I would want to be. What took much longer, Brian, was my confidence. It took a long time to, when you're young, I was, at 21 or 22, I was too stupid to be scared. You just pick it up and you just do it, right? You don't think about it. No. That's what young men do, right?
Yes.
But as an older guy, by this stage, again, my maths failed me, but I'm probably in my late 40s, maybe 50s, I'm not sure.
Yeah.
And my chops were fine. It's just, it was the confidence that took a long time to come back. It really took a year, more than a year before I felt comfortable. And it's interesting because it shouldn't be that. I was very fortunate as a young man to study with a trumpet teacher in New York called Carmine Caruso, an amazing teacher, taught some of the world's greatest trumpet players and me. And a lot of what Carmine talked about was the mental approach to playing, right? He would often say, you can split the note before you've even put the trumpet on your face, right? The minute you entertain the idea you're not going to hit it, right, you're in trouble straight away before you even put it on your face. And after 8 years off, I went back a bit too soon. I must be honest. I went back to I would dip in some shows in the West End, right? And those things that a peculiar thing about West End shows is a lot of it is on the stick, so you've just got it's nothing even hard, just an A just above the stave, and it's bang like this. And you cannot entertain the idea of missing that, right? Because the world and its dog.
Out the door. The door. Yep.
The cloakroom attendants, they're going to be running around in circles if you miss that, right? and that terrified me, and it took me a long time, more than a year, to just feel confident enough in my own abilities to just not even think about it and nail that note. So that's the thing I found interesting. It wasn't my chops. It was that sort of self-belief. What trumpet players need that. It's a key part of our toolkit.
Carmine Caruso, I'm glad you mentioned him because he's a bit of a standout in the education field, in that I understand he'd never played a brass instrument in his life. No, and yet through the door there's Marvin Stamm. Herb Albert would ring him up from Los Angeles. Can you give me a lesson over the phone? You got all these, the big money earners and the great players.
John Faddis, all those guys, they all went to him,
Going to a man who had never papped out. I would have more credentials on trumpet than him because I can play Mary Had a Little Lamb. So
there we go.
So what was it? He was obviously an amazing philosopher or something. Well, how do you think he got in the trumpet player's mind without ever playing a note on that instrument?
Yeah, well, look, the whole premise of his book is called Calisthenics for Brass, and it's really just about building muscle, right? And so his argument was that I don't need to be able to play the trumpet to know how to build muscles.
Okay.
I wouldn't necessarily agree with that, but that was his viewpoint. But really and truly, he was, so much of playing the trumpet it's a mental game. right? It is, and I think the way in which he's a standout for me is, just the way in which he would approach. He would break down the whole thing, and to the point where you think it was stupid and irrational to be afraid. Right? It's actually more natural to not be afraid, just because of the way in which he could impart this information. If you think of it, for example, if I take a piece of gaffer tape, okay, and I roll a piece of gaffer tape along the floor, and I ask you to walk along that's not a problem. Unless you've had a few drinks, it's a problem. Not a problem. You walk along it.
Yeah.
Okay. Now I ask you to walk along the bar, the thing they use in gymnastics. It's about it's about 5 feet off the ground. Well, it's a little bit trickier, okay, right? And then I put that up there 30 feet in the air, and you'd think I was a madman to even try to walk across.
Yes,
it's the same width. It's exactly the same width. So
yes.
What is the difference? The difference is we look down, right? So you just have to train yourself not to look down, and I guess. These guys who walk the high wire, all they've done is they've taught themselves not to look down.
Yes,
and that is one of the sort of things that Caruso would he would say, the gap between the bottom rung and the next rung of a ladder is exactly the same as the gap between the top rung and the rung below it. Right?
Yes.
Why should it be any more difficult? Because we look down.
It's
and
philosophy.
So really,
that's wonderful.
Yeah, that was his approach, really.
Johnny, you've been a session musician for almost all your life. What's it like in the UK? I mean, you're a guy that's played on 38 number one hits, and you've certainly had success, but financially in the UK, is there any ongoing residual payments for session musicians in the type of work you do? Or is it a one-time fee, thanks very much?
Well, there are. But nowhere near as many as they used to be. So they have been gradually eroded. We used to get paid when it was used here, and if an artist mimed on a TV show, we had to be paid as though we were there, whether we were there or not. Yes. But all of those things sort of gradually been worn away, and we're now left. Largely, there are a couple of exceptions, but largely we're left with what we call PPL. I'm not sure what the Australian equivalent of that is.
AMCOS and APRA in Australia, but it's
AMCOS. That's it. APRA, AMCOS. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
I think that's your equivalent, possibly. I don't know. Yeah. Well, but PPL is phonographic performance license, and it's one of the many benefits that the UK derived from being a member of the EU. Okay. Which we sadly aren't anymore, but this was a piece of EU legislation that said that. Going back to the 30s, I'll be very quick. I promise.
Okay, yeah.
Going back to the 30s, some music on the radio. Okay, it was live bands. They'd have live bands playing almost all day. For the whole of the day. Yes. And then some bright spark had the idea, well, why don't we just play some records, right? We don't have to pay all those musicians. We just play some records. And anyway, out of the subsequent dispute on that came a thing called the Needle Time Agreement. So radio stations were allowed to play records, but they had to pay so much per minute of record that they played. They had to pay this to the local union, okay? And until, I think, 1985 or 6, somewhere around then, the union just kept that money and they used it to fund union things. We have a pretty strong union in the UK, musicians union.
Yeah.
And then the EU said, no, this money has to go to the people that earned it. So a percentage of that, I think 25% of it, is divided amongst all of the, what they call non-featured artists, in other words, the studio guys. So, and I think that's only right and fair. We share in the success of, you have to think, well, we must have played some part in the success of a particular record. Otherwise, they wouldn't have wasted their money having us on there in the first place, right?
Totally agree.
So we do get that, and that's, that forms a significant chunk of my income these days. Around about 40% of my income is that residual income.
The one I always remember as a sax player is the iconic sax part in Jerry Rafferty's Baker Street. Now, they're all gone now. The sax player, Raphael Ravenscross, session man, come in. I think he was paid 30 quid. Did you ever know this guy? the sax guy?
I toured. I toured with Marvin Gaye. With Raf was Marvin Gaye's MD for a little while, and I toured with them in the UK.
And
yeah, I knew Raf very, very well.
And I mean, and not knocking Jerry Rafferty, but take the sax part out of Baker Street. You've got a pretty ordinary old. You got a singer songwriter song at the wine bar. You know, Jerry would drive past in the Rolls Royce, picking up $800,000 a year or something like that from the road, and never once stopped and knocked on his door and say, "Mate, that sax playing you did. Look, here's whatever it was." He would have been happy.
Sure,
you know, he would have been happy with probably 10 grand. But your feedback was good, that there is something. There is a, even if it's only token. Now, you've spent a fair bit of time playing with a great sax player called Snake Davis. I mean, I love the nickname. I think his real name's Christopher, is it? Is it Christopher Davis?
It is Chris, yeah. It is Chris, yeah.
Great player. And it's funny, you said earlier, I play with a band called the Snake Davis Trio. Well, I actually want to play a clip of you with that trio, and you do it's a great little song just called All Blues. Beautiful, Miles Davis song, beautiful, relaxed playing. The three of you just listening to each other. We haven't got boom crash opera in the background. We haven't got the percussion and the drum guys. But we actually, but we get to hear your beautiful tone and your approach, your relaxed approach to improvisation. Let's have a look and a listen to All Blues. What an amazing interplay the three of you had on that track. Now, I understand you know, as a group, you've known each other there for quite a long time. Tell us about that.
Yeah, the three of us we all went to the Leeds College of Music in I don't know, 1876 or something. It was a long time ago. Uh, it was at the time, Brian. It was the only college outside of Berkeley in the US where you could do a music degree, but based around jazz and popular music.
Yeah.
So not that it mattered because none of us finished anyway. We all left. We all got gigs before we graduated. So, but nonetheless, I could have been a contender. I could have had a degree. So the three of us, we were all in the same class, and we sort of we go and do our own thing. So Snake is kind of went into being a solo artist, although he did have a long spell with Take That, and he's done lots of what do you call them? M people. He's with M people for a long time, but by and large, he wanted to be a solo artist, and he's built that career. I just wanted to be a little fat bloke at the back, right? I like being. For me, I always wanted to be a studio player. That's all I never wanted to be like a front man or anything like that. Because what I love about it, Brian, is this, I turn up, I'm booked to do a session at 10 o'clock in the morning. I turn up at the studio, got no idea what it is, what kind of music, who it's for, nothing. Yep. And you've got to sort of, and I love the edge of that. You know what I mean? I just love that.
The freshness.
That sort of challenge. Yeah, absolutely. I think of myself more as an artisan rather than an artist. I get pleasure from doing a good job. That's what gives me a buzz.
If you had to say there was a young guy or girl, and we'll say a trumpet player for the sake, because that's your lane. They're still at school. They might be 13, 14, 15. They absolutely love their music. They're like you. They can't wait to get out of school to play music. But mum and dad saying, what are you going to do when you leave school? And the school guidance counsellor, I don't think, is saying, have you ever thought of being a pop trumpet player or maybe a jazz trumpet player? I don't think it's on their list of possible career options.
Psychiatrist, maybe, but not, yeah.
So what would you say to that young person, given you think of what you've done? You've started literally in the mines, and thinking, I'm pretty sure that's not what I want to do. But
for sure.
But you've toured the world. You've got evidence of your success in that great little studio you've got there. 38 number one records. Seriously, it's extraordinary. What's your down to earth advice for that young person about what they should be thinking about if they want to make music a part of their life, not necessarily as you've done, you've had other income streams. What's your best piece of advice, you think, on that?
The life I live now, Brian, I didn't even know existed when I was 16, right? Let alone aspire to it. There is so much joy. The money doesn't matter. It's not. Don't make it about anybody who goes into music to make money is a fool. Right? Yeah. Go into it because you love doing it, and there is nothing greater in this life than doing something that you love. Everything else will fall into place. It doesn't really matter about the money, but if you love it, chances are you'll get pretty good and you'll make a living out of it. And you can ask, I think, any musician who whether they're successful or not, would you do the same thing again? And I guarantee you the vast majority of them would say absolutely, wouldn't change a thing. So it's the pathway to the most incredible life. And if you want to try it, go for it. Some people might say, well, yeah, but why me? Well, why not me? That was my approach, right? I never thought, why me? I thought, why not me? It's got to happen to somebody. Yeah. Right? So just go and do it. Go to go to wherever your nearest capital. If you're near Sydney or whatever. For me, it was London. I came to London. That's the only place to do it. I didn't know anybody. I had no money. I had nothing. I just came here, and somehow it works out. But my single piece of advice I would think to anybody who wants to be a pro musician, once they get beyond that, you can distill it down to one sentence: don't be a dick. Get along with people, right? You need to learn the art of networking without being pushy.
Mate, we're going to go out with another performance of you with Snake Davis, a beautiful original song of Snake's, I think, called Missing You. Absolutely
Okay.
beautiful. He's on the little curve soprano sax, which I love. You play it beautiful. Johnny, I just want to say thanks, mate. This has been a great conversation. There's been so many little golden nuggets in this conversation. Thanks for taking the time, for being part of it.
It's my pleasure. I've really, really enjoyed it, Brian. It's been a hoot.
For our collaboration video to end the podcast, I asked Johnny what song he would like to play. He picked a beautiful composition by Michel Legrand, made famous by Patti Austin and James Ingram. It's called How Do You Keep the Music Playing? It's the perfect vehicle for an instrumental version featuring Johnny's beautiful trumpet playing, and I accompany him on tenor saxophone.